All right, folks, we are going live. Yep. Okay, let's kind of get this party started. Just let me know in the chat when you can actually hear me. So you should be a little bit of a delay here. So just let me know. All right, sounds like we're good. Kevin can hear me. I hope the rest of you can as well. So let's kind of get going and let's try to do this relatively quickly, okay? So the test is for sure going to be 50 questions, okay? It is 50 multiple choice questions. I'm going to kind of get rid of this right here just to kind of give you guys some pointers, right? 50 multiple choice questions, okay? So actually, I think it's actually 51, but we're only going to count 50. So basically, you get one free mess up. There you go. So the topics that are going to be on the test include absolutism, right? What is absolutism? And then the countries that we talked about that it affected, in particular, are France, Russia, and England, right? We have the English Civil War, the scientific Revolution, the Enlightenment, French Revolution, Napoleon leading into the Congress of Vienna after the French Revolution, Latin American revolutions, and then ultimately the Italian and German unifications. Right? So the easiest way I think to do this is for me to kind of go through the study guide that we just handed out in class the other day. We'll go through it, and you guys can kind of fill things in as we go, and as I talk over things, hopefully it'll be able to kind of make it a little fresher in your guys' minds. But the best way I'm going to say, to really hammer some points in is to probably drill the questions into your head, drill in the people, drill in, the concepts and things like that, right? But it is going to be the test is it's not super easy. I'm going to be honest. So make sure you really put in a good effort to study tonight and tomorrow morning, maybe even rewatch this or something on the way to school. Who knows? But anyway, let's kind of get going here. So if you don't know how to get to the study guides on Blackboard, so let's just kind of bring over the Blackboard, right? So you have this is what the Blackboard looks like, right? We've got all of our lists right here. I'm talking about the live stream, obviously, and the link to get here, so I don't know if that's the way you came, but the best way to find the two different study guides is to go to the Google Drive, which is just right here. So when you click that right there, it should bring you to the class Google Drive that looks something like this. Okay, and then from there you can actually find the study guides right here. So this is quarter 2, right? Test study guide part 1 and part 2. So we did basically the first part. It's kind of separated, kind of like a sandwich, right? You kind of have the middle part here at part 1 when we had our last test before the break. And then part 2 was kind of a refresher on absolutism, and then the Italian unification and German unification, as well as the Latin American revolutions, right? So we are doing part 2 right here. So let's kind of open this up and kind of begin. Okay. So this is it's kind of a little light, so you should be able to see it. It looks like pretty good on my screen actually, but I can zoom in a little bit just to make it a little bit easier, right? So let's kind of roll through this, and feel free again to ask questions in the chat and fill it in as we go here yourself, right? So the age of absolutism is going to get its name from a series of monarchs in Europe, right? And many of these monarchs are going to claim that they have authority without limit, right? There's no limit on their authority. That's what absolutism means, absolute power, right? They can do whatever they want. And many of these people are saying this because they rule by what is known as divine right, and divine meaning God and religious, right? Kevin, I'll get to the Latin American later, okay? Right, these divine right. And they say basically that God created the monarchy itself, so therefore the king is really only answerable to God themselves, right? And often there are other people that are looking for power and trying to get power, so the king, what they have to do is usually kind of get rid of these people and centralize that power on themselves, right? And they're going to centralize this power into the monarchy itself, okay? So In France, we have the family known as the Bourbon family. I don't speak French, so I'm probably butchering that a little bit. You have the Romanov family in Russia. You have the Stuarts in England are the big three that we talk about. So the French king that's going to come to power and really kind of kick off the major absolutism in France anyway, is a man named King Louis. This is the 14th. Sorry, should be XIV right there. And the big thing is, right, there's going to be three obstacles to this for him, right? You have the nobles, which all have some sort of local authority and power in their own areas, right? So being able to kind of usurp them and supersede them is pretty important, and the nobles are going to obviously scheme in certain cases, and dealing with them scheming, the king has to kind of control them a bit. So the other obstacle is going to be the church, right? So if this is a man who claims he has divine right and that God gives him his power, the church is going to obviously want to try to have some influence in that, being as they are religious and about God, right? So the next big piece is the Estates General, which is known as the legislature, right? The legislature is the group that makes laws and controls taxes and other things. So he's got to be able to control them a bit in order to kind of have this absolute power that he is hoping for, right? So what does he do to solve these problems? He's able to subdue those nobles to kind of take control of what he wants to. He's able to take control of the church. And then ultimately he's able to kind of eliminate the Estates General, really to not call them, right? If you don't need them around, he doesn't call them. And therefore he's able to kind of make laws and things himself without consulting them, which is a pretty big deal, right? We have the three estates in France, if you remember, which we kind of talked about during the French Revolution. So anyway, King Louis XIV establishes and builds this beautiful palace at a place called Versailles, which is just outside of Paris, and it is such a lavish creation. It's such a beautiful building, right, that has so many resources and so much time devoted to creating it that it really is this kind of full symbol of royal power, right? So, again, I don't speak French necessarily, so I'm going to butcher the French here, but it's l'état, c'est moi, I believe, which means basically, I am the state. So Louis XIV is saying that he himself, controls everything, and he is the state himself. Okay. So that's kind of a recap on France. You don't need to know much more than that. So let me just take a sip of water here quick. So let's move in, right? So moving on to 11 here and talking about Russia a bit. Right, so what is the name given to the Russian kings? And that is going to be the Tsar, Tsar or Czar, depending on how you want to spell it. But where you get that from, right? So think back to Rome. Right, the Caesar is the ruler and the emperor, essentially, and the king, and that's where this word is going to get derived from, and that's going to remain and stay all the way through the many, many years leading up to this, right? So the Russian family that's going to rule in Russia between 1613 and ultimately 1918, right up to the Communist Revolution during World War I, is the Romanov family. And a man named Peter the Great is going to come into power in 1696 in Russia. And once Peter the Great becomes the Tsar, what he's actually going to look to do is to basically travel. And he sees some great things going on in Western Europe. He really enjoys the culture, but also technological improvements and cultural improvements and things like that. And one of the things he aims to do then in Russia is to actually westernize it, right? When he comes back from Western Europe, he feels like he wants to change Russia, similarly to, a way of the Europeans, right? So he does. He brings back this Western culture into Russia, and that's going to be a big deal. He's going to kind of make Russia a bit more of a modern country than it had been up to this point. He's going to build this big city, this beautiful city known as St. Petersburg, which is the name of it is going to change quite a bit, but ultimately is now resettled back on St. Petersburg again. Okay. So that's it for Russia, right? There's really not much there. I went through that pretty quickly. That's really all you really need to know for the SOL and for what we're kind of talking about here for this test, okay? So moving down the line here, you now are going to England, right? And England is going to be a bit of a different development of absolutism than other countries that we just talked about, especially France and Russia, right? And part of that is because of the creation of a document known as the Magna Carta in the middle of the 1200s. The Magna Carta is going to spell out kind of a law system in England that's going to kind of put into law some power being taken from the king, right? So there's not quite an absolute power, an absolute monarchy in England after this, and the nobles and things are going to be drawing power and pulling power from the king, and you're going to kind of have this struggle of kings trying to take more power and nobles trying to take more power for really a long time here. But anyway, the foundation of these English freedoms are going to come from this Magna Carta in many cases, and you're going to get this common law that's going to be established as a result, and also a jury system, which is a big deal, right? Being able to be tried by a jury instead of just basically having someone who's higher up than you basically ruling on you automatically, right? That's a pretty big deal. So, if you remember, we talked about the Tudor family, right? Henry VIII, and then all the way finishing up with Elizabeth. But when Elizabeth doesn't have an heir, the throne in England is going to pass to the Stuarts, the Stuart family, right? And there are going to be 5 Stuart rulers that we kind of talked about briefly here. You're going to have James I, Charles I, Charles II, James II, and then finally settling on William and Mary here, right? So the best way that I remember it, right, is you think of it like you have a Charles sandwich on James bread, right? So you have the Jameses on either side, you have the Charleses in the middle, and obviously the ones are going to come before the twos. So you have James I, Charles II, James II, and then on the bottom you have William and Mary. So that should be pretty easy to think about and to remember. Okay, so once again, the Charles sandwich on James bread. Okay, and we talked about an English Civil War, right? The English Civil War is going to be between King Charles I and Parliament, right? And there's going to be some major differences there, and obviously differing opinion. You're going to have Charles I trying to take more and more power from Parliament, which is basically the nobles at this point, and Parliament doesn't agree, right? We've talked about this in quite a bit of detail in class, and what's going to happen is the Parliament is going to gather its own army, and you're going to have people loyal to the king, you're going to have people loyal to Parliament, and the Parliament is going to be led by a man named Oliver Cromwell, and ultimately the parliamentary forces are going to be successful, and they're going to capture Charles I. They're going to actually try him, and they're actually going to execute him, right? And that's a pretty serious deal. Right? It's a pretty big deal that the King of England is going to be executed by what amounts to the nobles and on behalf of the people of England, right? So during this time, right, you're going to have the Whigs and Tories, which are going to be the groups that come out of this, right? And they're going to become factions, which are known as political parties, right? That's really all you need to know there, right? So now with Oliver Cromwell kind of taking the reins for a little while, when he dies, what's going to happen is England is going to decide to restore the monarchy, and this is going to be known in English history as the Restoration, right? So the person who is going to be restored to the English throne during this time period is Charles II, right? Charles II. So after that, after the Restoration, you're going to have what's called the Glorious Revolution. And what's going to happen is basically you're going to have William and Mary basically be given the option of taking the throne under certain conditions, right? They basically accept and they agree to what's called the English Bill of Rights as a result of that, right? And by agreeing to the English Bill of Rights, they're giving rights to the people and the nobles, again, further taking away some of the power of the monarchy and giving it to the people of England. Okay, any questions there, just type them in chat, and if not, I'm going to just kind of keep rolling here. Okay, so we have next on our list, we have the Italian and German unifications, right? So the two men that are going to be responsible for the unification in Italy is a man named Count Cavour and a man named Garibaldi, right? So Count Cavour is going to be responsible for bringing together northern Italy, while Garibaldi is going to be responsible for bringing together southern Italy. He's going to join southern Italy to northern Italy, and from there you're going to get quite a bit more of a unified Italy, of course, right? So the last states, right, to kind of unite with Italy, and what's going to be left here is essentially the papal states, right? And at that point, what's going to be left is simply just the Vatican City, is that's all the Pope is left with, right? Everything else is going to be more or less Italy, and Vatican City is still technically considered today. It's a micronation. It's still actually technically a country, which is kind of pretty cool if you think about it. Okay, so pretty simple there on Italian unification. There's not much there that you actually need to know, right? Count Cavour is the north, Garibaldi's the south. They bring them together. They're able to take control of the papal states at that point. And the last bit that's kind of not part of actual Italy, but encompassed within Italy, is Vatican City inside of Rome, right? Okay, so moving down the line here, we are now going to be talking about the German unification, right? And the big person that's going to be in charge of that is a man named Otto von Bismarck, right? He is the Prussian prime minister who is mostly responsible for the unification of Germany, and he's going to receive the nickname the Iron Chancellor as a result, mostly because of some of the things he's able to say, that he's going to be able to kind of conquer and take control, right, through what's called blood and iron, right? And he's going to basically push a number of wars to achieve his agenda. He's going to actually have 3 different wars that he's going to kind of push as a means of rallying the people of Prussia and Austria and basically sorry, not necessarily Austria, but other areas, other kingdoms in Germany. Rally them together, right, to be able to fight these common enemies. It's a big rallying cry. And his actions are going to be seen as an example of what is known as realpolitik, right? And that basically more or less means the politics of reality, and it kind of similarly mirrors Machiavelli with his thoughts of basically being able to do whatever necessary to achieve that power and such. So what he does is he goes to war. He goes to war with Denmark, he goes to war with Austria, and he goes ultimately to war with France, France being a large enemy of the German peoples for a long period of time here, thinking back to the Reformation and thinking back to some of the wars that were going on there. So this fighting with France is pretty big deal, although it goes very, very smoothly for the Germans, and you're going to have, what is it? It doesn't necessarily matter. I mean, there is an order there, obviously, Kevin, but France for sure is last, and you definitely should know that here because that's the kind of the final straw that breaks the camel's back as far as the unification is concerned, and it brings them together in the Franco-Prussian War. These German states, right? They come together to fight the French enemy, and they basically push all the way to Versailles. They actually declare the German Empire in the Hall of Mirrors, I believe, in Versailles, which is a pretty big slap in the face to the French, right? And they also take some of the territory in France, and that's going to be one of the major kind of issues and one of the major fights going on really all the way through World War I. You can basically say that this is kind of a precursor leading into World War I. Okay, so what years is the Franco-Prussian War fought? It's going to be fought between 1870 and 1871, and as I said just a second ago, it lays the foundation for World War I. So, the Prussian king, a man named Kaiser Wilhelm, right? I don't have it written. This is obviously, I can't just type here, but a man named Kaiser Wilhelm, I'll type it in the chat. How about? Kaiser Wilhelm, W's being like V's in German. So he is the man, he is the royalty, the Prussian king who's going to take control and declare himself emperor of Germany as a whole, right? And this is going to be the First Reich, or the Second Reich, sorry. Second Reich, and the Second Reich basically is, again, a precursor to what's known as the Third Reich, which is going to be Hitler years later, the German Empire. Anyway, okay, so any questions there about the German unification? It's a little bit more in the Italian there, but it's still not too much if you ask me. Okay, moving down to the last part of this review guide here for now, right? So the big cities that you should know, right, are Buenos Aires, which is in Argentina. You have Mexico City, which is in Mexico. I hope you know that. Lima is in Peru. You have Sao Paulo in Brazil. You have Havana in Cuba. Okay, and you're going to have kind of three big revolutions that we talked about anyway. You're going to have one in Haiti with a man leading it named Toussaint. I believe it's just like a Verture or something like that. Again, I'm not very fluent with French. But anyway, that's the man who takes control in Haiti. He leads the revolution there. He is a former slave, but we're going to get more of that in a second. So you have Mexico being led by a man named Father Miguel Hidalgo, the revolution there. Then you have a man named Simón Bolívar, who is going to be helping and responsible for a number of independent states in northern South America. Okay, so let's kind of recap why were these colonies important in the first place, right? European colonies, right? The whole point of these things is to provide resources to the mother country, right? To provide those raw materials. And to the mother country. That's a big deal. Those raw materials go home. They manufacture goods. They trade them in the triangular trade or other trade, and they work their way back to the Americas, which are now a new market. Right? You have people there, so those people want to buy things too. Right? So it's kind of it's a double win there for the European powers. Right? So what important consequences did the Spanish conquest in Latin America have on Latin American populations? So, right, when you have Columbus come in and you have Cortez and Pizarro and their men conquering, in Peru and ultimately Mexico and in the Caribbean, right, the diseases that the Spanish spread are actually going to kill, we believe now, over 90% of the native population in the Americas. And we have the highest estimates of the native populations in America. We're talking almost 100 million people at the highest, right? That's probably a bit extreme, but even cut that in half at 50 million is the current estimates about. That's a pretty serious number, and if you're going to kill 90+% because of the diseases, right? That's the big reason why many of the Europeans are saying that this continent is mostly, just abandoned. There's just nobody here, and that wasn't necessarily true right before Columbus and initially, but when people die, it makes a difference. But it opens up kind of this avenue for the Spanish and the Portuguese in particular in the Americas to kind of start their colonies, right? And then obviously the English as well up north. But anyway, okay, the Spanish colonies, they get this rapid decline of the native populations, and as a result, they lose what could have been slaves for them, right, what the hope was. So they are then forced to import and introduce slaves from Africa, right, to bring in these slaves from Africa to fill that labor need that they want. So as a result, you're going to get kind of mixing of peoples, right? And from there, you're going to then get this kind of rigid class system that develops. You have the peninsulares, which are the people that are born in Spain, and they're the kind of the highest in the area, right? They often can be the administrators of the government, in particular the highest levels of government. So you're then going to have Creoles, who are Spanish people, but they're born in America, right? So they don't necessarily have the status of actually being from Europe, but they are born in America. They're kind of seen as in between, right? They see themselves as in between, right? They're neither European and they're not native, right? So what are they? It's something that they're going to kind of need to figure out, right? And I would think about that for tomorrow for the test. So, anyway, right, so they are Spanish people that are born in America, Europeans that are born in America, right? So next, the Europeans do end up mixing a lot with the Spanish in particular, right? And you're going to then get a mixing of blood there, which are known as mestizos. They're going to be ranked a bit higher than the mixed European and African blood, which are known as mulattoes. And then lastly, you're going to have the African slaves and the descendants of slaves kind of at the bottom of the social class there. And the conquistadors, right, these people in Spain that had come over to help conquer and explore and things like that, they're often going to be given authority to govern lands, right? Columbus is going to be the governor of Hispaniola for a while, and so on, right? So that's kind of a big deal. And they're often given the title known as a viceroy. They're going to be the administrator. They're going to be in charge of this particular area, right? And the Spanish are going to impose their belief systems on the indigenous peoples that kind of make it and last, right? They're going to be imposing Christianity on these people. We talked about it a little bit in class. You read that little excerpt about what life was like at that time period. In particular, Catholicism is going to be the big push from the Spanish, right? You're going to have mission work and all of that good stuff, right? So the economic activity that the Spanish engage in was a lot of mining, a lot of looking for precious metals and precious materials that they could then bring back to Spain. Obviously, they're worth something, right? So that's kind of important, right? And that's what they intended to use the natives for, from a labor pool perspective at first, and they did, right? And they end up killing many of the natives in that regard, and then with the diseases on top of all of that, that's when the African slaves get brought in, right? So when you have class systems that look similarly to this, right, what's going to happen is the people in the middle are going to kind of not be okay with people on the top, right? The actions of the people on the top, they're going to be disappointed with, they're going to be upset about. And then when you have these different intellectual movements and revolutions going on throughout the world, from the Enlightenment and the American Revolution and the French Revolution as successful examples that are not that far from them or far removed from them, right? They're going to think to themselves, why can't they do this themselves, right? Why can't they have their own independence and revolutions, right? These people that are born there, that to them, that's important. So, to kick it off, right, you're going to have a man named Father Miguel Hidalgo, who is going to be leading more or less the Mexican independence movement, and he's going to be successful, right? And he's going to become known as the founder of Mexico. He's going to be able to encourage the mestizos and the natives to kind of revolt against their Spanish landlords in this encomienda system, which is the word to describe this system. It's the encomienda system, right? He's going to be able to get the mestizos and the natives to come together to kind of push against the Spanish landlords and to lead a successful independence movement and revolution. So that's a pretty big deal. You're going to next, in northern South America, you're going to have a man named Simón Bolívar, and he is a Creole, right? So he is someone who is Spanish descent that's born in America, right? And he is going to see, again, themselves as kind of in between, right? What is their role here? And they look for their own independence, obviously, and he's going to be successfully able to liberate some of the northern South American countries from Spanish rule in a bit of successful military campaigns. Okay, and then lastly, last couple of things here, we have the slave revolution in Haiti, which is a pretty big deal. The slaves rebel, are able to win the day and successfully defeat armies from a couple different European countries that are looking after their interest there in the Caribbean as slave powers, and they are going to be able to abolish slavery and win their independence. And a man named Toussaint Louverture, who is going to basically lead this, is a former slave and successfully leads the Haitian Revolution to win their own independence, right, from France and Napoleon, which is what then prompts Napoleon to actually sell the Louisiana Territory in the Americas to America and Thomas Jefferson in 1803. Anyway, okay, so moving on the line, the last piece of this puzzle that you should know is what's called the Monroe Doctrine, right? The Monroe Doctrine is a document that was written by, James Monroe, and the thought is that he is attempting to limit foreign influence in the Americas, right? The doctrine is going to be issued in 1823. It's directed at the European powers, and what it's basically saying to Europe is that any threat to the Americas and these newly established independent republics in Latin America, essentially, could be seen as a threat to the United States, and thus potentially considered an act of war. Right, and that the U.S. is basically saying to Europe to step off and stay out of our business here in the Western Hemisphere, and in doing so, we will also stay out of your business in the Eastern Hemisphere, in Europe in particular, right? So it says that basically the United States is acknowledging the independence movements of Latin America, right? And that's a pretty big deal, push from a country that has kind of starting to get a little bit more of a force in the world here, right, from America at this point. Okay, so anyway, that is it for this particular review guide, and I'm not going to go through the other one because I did last time, and you can just get that and watch that video on YouTube. So let me show you exactly where to find that. So if you go to www.youtube.com, my channel is c.garrettkroner right there. You can see that you should be able to see the URL right there. You can see that I'm streaming live. You can see all of my videos. We got World 2 videos here. I'm actually going to upload one on the Latin American revolutions. Even though I just covered it all, it'll be more formally set to this right here, in this line right here. And you're going to, I've basically past live streams, you can see the review guide right here, the other one for number 1, right? If you go, you can go back. There is a key of the first part of it right here in the Google Drive that you can kind of go through all of these different people again yourself. I would for sure refresh on the Enlightenment thinkers. Definitely refresh on your your scientific revolution people as well. Definitely run through all of this for sure. The test it's a pretty big test, so be ready for it. And it's you need to. It's more so than just spitting back this information. You need to actually think about things for some of these questions, right? And kind of use the knowledge to answer the question and not just spit it back at us, okay? So that being said, I'm going to leave you guys to your own studying. Good luck. And I will see you guys all when I see you. All right. Hello. All right. Bye, guys.